Well, good afternoon, everyone. I anticipate that more people will be joining us over the next couple of minutes, but just in the interest of time, I think we'll make a start to the webinar. So, well, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining us at this joint National Consortium for Societal Resilience and Resilience Beyond Observed Capability Project webinar. And our topic is Resilience Insights from Essential Sectors. So this is just a reminder for everyone, and especially for those who perhaps haven't attended one of our webinars before, but this session is being recorded and it will be available to watch back later. So my name is Andrew McClelland and I'm a research fellow at the Alliance Manchester Business School at the University of Manchester. So as well as welcoming you to today's webinar, I'll also be moderating the question and answer session at the end. So you will have already noticed that your microphones and cameras are currently switched off, but you can hopefully contribute questions throughout via the chat function. But please keep any question or comment succinct. We are aware from previous webinars that sometimes there can be some challenges using the chat function, but hopefully you're able to get through via it this afternoon. However, later during the question and answer session, I will ask questioners to raise their hands, and then we can individually enable people's microphones and cameras. We do prefer during our webinars if people do verbalise their own question, and also that we can see you and that you can introduce yourself and your organisation before doing so. We have a really great agenda and a great lineup of speakers for today's webinar. And our agenda is straightforward, as you can see on the screen. So we're delighted to have Chloe, Melissa and Roisin, who will be speaking to us today, and obviously then will be contributing via the question and answer session later on. So as you can see from the screen, both Chloe and Melissa will be doing a joint presentation, and they're both representing the Abri Group. And then Roisin Jordan, a colleague of mine at the University of Manchester, who's currently undertaking her PhD research and has done a lot of research then around essential sectors. So as I mentioned earlier, as well as then this introduction, I will also then be moderating the question and answer session. We tend to have quite generous question and answer periods, hopefully 30 to 40 minutes. Length, but obviously we will run with whatever we have for the course of the 1.5 hours. So this webinar, as we said in the blurb to introducing it, is around essential sectors, and these essential sectors help the most vulnerable in society and are an important part of the support system during a disruption, such as the recent storms and flooding that the UK and Ireland in particular have experienced over the last week. So essential sectors are sectors that provide support to meet essential needs, and they must be resilient to disruptions so that they can continue to provide support no matter what the situation is. So this webinar is really going to focus and hone in on how to better understand and build resilient essential sectors, and also then the role specifically of social housing and supporting vulnerable people who have an essential need. Before handing you over to Chloe and Melissa, I just have a few diary dates and a few other reminders for you. Our main in-person event of the calendar year is coming up relatively soon. So the third National Conference on Societal Resilience will be taking place at the University of Manchester on the 10th to 11th of March 2025. We released the day one programme a couple of weeks back, and we anticipate being able to circulate the full conference programme in the next couple of weeks. So please, if you haven't already booked your place, please go on to the website shown on the screen. I will also add that to the chat function later on, and then please consider securing your place. And just by way of then reminder, all of our webinars are recorded, and those are made available then via our webpage. You can also then connect with the consortium via LinkedIn. And we would also encourage you to check out the webpage of our partner in this webinar series, the Resilience Beyond Observed Capabilities Network Plus project. So I think without further ado, I will stop sharing screen and I'll ask Melissa and Chloe to come off mute and to share their slides so that then we can begin the first presentation of today's webinar. So Melissa and Chloe, I can see your slides up on screen. So yeah, the floor is over to you now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. It really is a pleasure to be facilitating this session for you. Today, Chloe and I will be sharing some resilience insights with you from the perspective of a housing association. Some of the content we will share today is quite specific to that of the United Kingdom, but we hope there will be some useful learning for you to take away wherever you are in the world.
Hello, everybody. As Melissa said, it's really lovely to be with you all today. I'm Chloe Fox. I'm Interim Head of Safety and Resilience at Abri. I've worked at Abri for the last 13 years, covering all departments in social housing, and I currently head up our business continuity team.
And I'm Melissa Kenney. I am the Business Continuity Advisor here at Abri, and I have had the pleasure of working for Abri and indeed with Chloe for the last 3 years. And before my working world with Abri, I worked at a local authority where I was looking after emergency planning and indeed business continuity as well.
So a little bit about Abri. So Abri is a large housing provider and we're based in the south of England, and we own and manage more than 55,000 homes and we support over 120,000 residents. We work across 48 local authorities and across 94 parliamentary constituencies. We believe that everybody has the right to a good quality, safe, warm and sustainable home in a community where they can belong, grow and thrive. We've recently invested £100 million into our existing homes, as well as £3.7 million into the cost of living support for our customers, our residents, and to aid community investment. We are ranked number 40 in the UK top 100 best large companies to work for, and we are an Investors in People Platinum. So what does resilience mean to us at Abri? Well, we have 4 streams of resilience, which focuses on our residents, our communities, our organisation, and our sector. With regards to our residents, we try to take a resident-centric response to emergencies and disruptions, but they're guided by our plans, our policies, and our procedures. By placing the resident at the centre of our decision-making, our strategic intent, and our approach, we're always able to respond with a social heart. We host community engagement sessions and local events to support preparedness and bring awareness to community risk. For example, we recently held a community action day at a series of high-rise residential blocks in Bristol on the topic of "Do you feel safe in your home?" And this was kindly supported by the local police and fire and rescue service. With regards to our communities, to respond to community and resident emergencies, we have a generic emergency response plan, and this enables us to strategically, tactically, and operationally respond. To support our overarching generic emergency response plan, we have a series of community-specific emergency plans, which are aimed at communities such as our independent living schemes. And we also regularly exercise our community response to ensure that our plans are tried and tested.
Which brings me nicely into our organisation. So similar to our community response, we have a generic business continuity plan, which enables a strategic, tactical and operational response to any organisational disruption that has the potential to impact our service delivery. This is supported by business continuity toolkits for each Abri department, enabling each department and team to respond to disruptions and prioritise their services. Whilst we opt to take a generic approach to incident response, we also have a whole host of incident and location-specific plans and playbooks that identify and respond to specific threats such as cyber and civil unrest. And we regularly hold awareness and training activities with our colleagues, ensuring they are fully equipped to assist our residents and respond to incidents. Alongside this, we regularly hold exercises which test our plans and ensure that they are fit for purpose. Finally, in our sector, we are active Business Continuity Institute, BCI, members, and we participate with the Business Continuity Social Housing Forum to improve our partnership working. We also participate in BCI special interest groups, such as Women in Resilience, and frequently attend BCI webinars and conferences. So now we know what resilience means to us. How do we put this into practice? I will now spend a moment talking to you all about a time Abri worked with partners to keep our residents safe during an emergency. It was 12:33 a.m. on the 10th of May 2023. The Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service were alerted to a fire within Somerset Court, a block of flats owned by Abri in Gosport, Hampshire, which had spread into the roof. At the height of this incident, around 60 firefighters were in attendance across the whole county. As a result, 4 people were taken into hospital for burns, smoke inhalation, and indeed for precautionary checks. There were even 4 dogs and 3 cats rescued from this building by firefighters. Abri were notified of the fire in the early hours of the following morning and very quickly mobilised to support, invoking our emergency process and our generic emergency response plan that we touched upon in the previous slide. Our colleagues were soon present at the incident scene, supporting our residents and helping other agencies who were present, such as the emergency services. All 68 of our residents in this block needed to be placed in temporary accommodation as the fire had completely destroyed their home. Understandably, this incident was traumatising for many Abri residents, some of whom lost not only their homes, but all of their belongings in the fire. As the fire escalated, some Abri residents were even throwing their mattresses out of their window and jumping out to escape. Our Abri colleagues were an integral part of this story. They truly put our residents at the forefront of their actions throughout. To go alongside this, we held an open day at a local community centre to help and support those impacted, and we remained in regular contact with our residents to keep them informed. Our colleagues set up a support package that included help with meals and transportation, and several voluntary groups and organisations offered to help with clothing and furniture provision. As you can imagine, the recovery of this incident was extensive and it was long, with some of these residents needed to be placed in permanent alternative accommodation. Despite this incident provided an opportunity for us to learn as an organisation and reflect on what went well in terms of our response and how we can improve future responses. Throughout it all was the common theme of collaborative working amongst our Abri colleagues and other agencies and organisations, which truly displays the power of partnerships.
As a housing association, we do face some challenges with regards to resilience and what we can deliver for our residents. And some of the challenges I speak through might ring true with you too. So firstly, recognition. Housing associations are not recognised as an emergency responder under the Civil Contingencies Act. And this brings some difficulty with knowing exactly what is expected and reasonable when responding to emergencies. This can also pose some issues for recognised responders under the Act, as it isn't always clear what role a housing association will take when responding to an emergency, if a role at all. Expectations. regardless of whatever expectation is brought to us under the Civil Contingencies Act, our residents expect us to act quickly as their landlord to respond to emergency incidents and continue to provide them with a safe, warm space to call home. This means that we are tackled with how far we can reasonably go in an incident versus what our residents may feel is acceptable. And finally, we have some limitations. There are limitations to what we can provide when responding to an emergency, meaning we rely heavily on the support provided by organisations like yourselves, but also voluntary and community organisations in order to assist us.
Now we come on to the slide where we talk about how your local housing association can help you. Your local housing association will most likely have a role or team dedicated to resilience in some shape or form. They will have skills available to assist you in the arena of emergency preparedness and business continuity. Your local housing association will have plenty of geographical knowledge to share with you, in particular during an incident, and indeed community awareness. Your local housing association will most likely be a set of eyes and ears in the community that you can call on to assist you with any community awareness that you might need.
Your local housing association will be ready and waiting to collaborate with you on incidents that mean that they are best able to support the needs of their customers. Similar to community awareness, your local housing association will have an understanding of vulnerabilities within communities that may aid your response and actually be able to provide a more supportive response. Your local housing association would be brilliant for you to invite along to a local resilience forum event, for you to learn more about their roles, but also for them to learn more about your response and how you can best support each other. And finally, we have found much benefit at Abri from including our local authority partners and emergency services within our exercises. It really opens up an opportunity for learning, awareness, and building those all-important connections. So our ask to you today, we would like to leave you with this, which is to start a conversation about resilience and preparedness with your local housing association. Utilising connections and working in partnership is vital in an emergency. So why not start today, reach out to your local housing association and just see what they could offer you.
Please connect with us. We would love to continue this conversation with any of you. If you'd like to connect with us, you can see our email addresses and indeed our LinkedIn handles on this slide.
And finally, we hope you've enjoyed hearing about some of the insights that we can share with you today from the perspective of a housing association. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to taking your questions at the very end of the session. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chloe and Melissa. A really great run through of the work of the Abri Group, and obviously then the interconnections with the kind of work that the Consortium and our various resilience partnerships and other partners have been doing in relation to wider societal resilience. And look forward to then the question and answers session later on and some of the questions that may be drawn forth. I would encourage those with questions already to obviously begin to add those to the chat, and then we will have an opportunity to come to those later on. But Roisin, if you're able to at this point then share your slides, and we can then proceed on to our second presentation of the webinar. So thank you. I can see it.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Sorry, can I check? Can you see my slides just to make sure?
I can, yes.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Andrew. And hi, everyone. I'm Roisin. I'm a doctoral researcher in the business school at the University of Manchester, and I work with Andrew and the NCSR team at the university. So today I'm going to share some detail on the third NCSR module, which is focused on resilient essential sectors to support vulnerable persons in the context of societal resilience. It's been really great to hear from you, Chloe and Melissa, first, and your insights on resilience. Much of what you've talked about really resonates with a lot of the learning that informed the development of this module. And that work involved businesses providing social housing like Abri, but also businesses providing domiciliary care. But I think it's been really interesting to hear about your different streams of resilience, some of the things that you do when a disruption happens, some of the challenges that you've noted as well, which I think really help to contextualize the module and why organisations in sectors like yourselves are so important in societal resilience. So just by way of a brief background, recognising that we have both an international audience and audience beyond the Consortium and resilience partnerships today. So as part of its work on societal resilience to disruption, the NCSR published a strategy and manual on how to create a local resilience capability to operationalise societal resilience based on a series of interconnected modules. So these modules are the moving parts of a local resilience capability. And many of you may be familiar with the first two modules, the first on community hubs and the second on spontaneous volunteers. And the third, which the module that I'll introduce today, is focused on the resilience of essential sectors to support people who are vulnerable in a disruption. I'll begin with some background on language, like essential sectors, and how the module was developed as well, and some of the principles underpinning the module before detailing the four different parts to the module. So just to first highlight, in terms of the module, the target audience for this module is resilience partnerships, which for international colleagues on the call are the multi-agency collaborations that address local risk, vulnerability and preparedness for disruption in the UK. So the module focuses on how resilience partnerships can better understand and strengthen the resilience of businesses that are in sectors providing essential services to people who are vulnerable in a disruption, which this module calls essential sectors. Like social housing, those sectors who play a vital role in the support system for people who have essential needs in a disruption. And so the module focuses on essential sectors because, for example, when thinking about working with businesses in the context of societal resilience, resilience partnerships will perhaps be looking across the business sector as a whole in your area. And lots of businesses are doing different things and have very different offers in this context. And so it can be difficult perhaps to pinpoint where to start and which businesses to start with. So the module suggests where to start, where to finish, and a process on how to get there. And it suggests starting with collections of businesses in business sectors. So not with individual businesses, because, for example, limitation of resources in resilience partnerships mean that all individuals can't be worked with equally. It also suggests focusing on resilience work with essential sectors. And that's because of the nature of what they do, who they do it for, as Chloe and Melissa really excellently described in the case of social housing just now, and really the importance of these sectors being resilient for people who are at risk and vulnerable in a disruption, and therefore the resilience partnership as well. So a principle that underpins the focus on essential sectors recognises that many in society are resilient and can self-help when a disruption happens, and they can address their own needs. It's not exactly 80%, and we're not saying it's an exact proportion. But if we assume it's 80%, that 80% are resilient, then we can focus in on the 20% who need additional help because, for example, they might not have agency to self-help, they're at risk or are more vulnerable to the impacts of a disruption. And so they're the 20% that begin to put a focus in terms of how we can best support them in a disruption. So in terms of addressing essential needs in a disruption, the module applies the same principle to businesses. So recognising that the business sector is vast and diverse, businesses' other objectives and resources in resilience partnerships, the module separates essential sectors from regular businesses. So regular businesses being the 80%, where the resilience partnership might provide generic information on local risks or business continuity, as many already do. And essential sectors are the 20% that, if the provision of services is affected in a disruption, a risk of harm is created for vulnerable people, which may then require the resilience partners to step in to ensure continuous provision and address unmet needs. And so this principle provides a more manageable place to begin thinking about the parts of society that need the most help when a disruption happens, and prioritising resilience work with the other parts of society, such as businesses in essential sectors, which are key to providing that help in a disruption. And I think Chloe and Melissa demonstrated this point really, really well in terms of the connection of these types of sectors have to residents and communities, and their extensive insights on needs and also the local impacts of a disruption and how those are locally felt in residential areas, for example. So the learning gathered through the work that informed the module really demonstrated that these sectors are pivotal to operationalising a local resilience capability. And so the module describes a process for resilience partnerships to work with an essential sector, to better understand the preparedness and resilience of the sector, identify and plan to close resilience gaps, identify how the sector contributes to societal resilience, and jointly evaluate the resilience that results. So the module was developed over 3 phases, which involved extensive consultation with resilience partnerships. And that was through a project that was led by Cleveland Local Resilience Forum, involving 12 resilience partnerships in the Northwest and part funded by MHCLG. So over the 3 phases, the project conducted 11 workshops involving over 120 people, and that includes service providers, commissioners and resilience partners. The first phase worked with resilience partnerships to define the problem and define the focus on developing a process to support targeted resilience work with an essential sector. This phase also selected to work with domiciliary care and social housing sectors to explore their resilience in phase 2. So these sector-focused workshops in phase 2 involved providers of domiciliary care and social housing, local health and care commissioners, ICB, NHS colleagues and housing managers, and began to develop the process that's outlined in the module. Finally, then in phase 3, which involved a number of workshops. One of those included an in-person full-day workshop in Merseyside with social housing providers, and that was complemented by a number of workshops with resilience partners as well. And that process really helped to test and refine the process that's outlined in the module. So just before we move on to specifically the process that's outlined in the module, just to highlight the terms that are key to understanding that process, which I've been using, so just to clarify their meaning in this module. The first term is essential needs, and that includes needs that exist before a disruption, including people who perhaps have pre-existing vulnerabilities and additional support needs, which may be heightened or changed during a disruption, or indeed new essential needs and new demand that arises because of a disruption. Some people, of course, are able to self-help through family, friends, and others need additional targeted support. And so the module focuses in on the support structure that people rely on to meet their essential needs in a disruption. And businesses within essential sectors play a really important part in those support structures because they deliver services to sustain the everyday living of people who are vulnerable in a disruption. And as we heard in the Somerset court case study that Melissa and Chloe described, these sectors also support residents by keeping them informed during a disruption, when a disruption happens, and throughout, and also working collaboratively to source and arrange alternative accommodation and supporting people with support packages and meals, as Melissa and Chloe mentioned. For resilience partnerships, there are a couple of additional factors that help to define essential sectors. So specifically for resilience partnerships, a sector is essential when it's unable to continue to provide services due to a disruption, and resilience partners may need to step in to support unmet needs. And we found that might happen because a sector is unable to surge to meet new demand that's been created by a disruption. For example, if one or multiple providers are affected by a disruption and the sector is unable to scale up provision, perhaps due to limited capacity or dependence on limited resources that are shared across businesses in the sector, such as within contracting or supply chains. It might also happen where there's a lack of alternatives outside of the sector that can provide an equivalent service to meet a surge in demand. And in short, really, it's those conditions in a disruption which mean that if the sector cannot surge to meet that demand, then people in the 20% become more vulnerable. And it falls to the resilience partnership to generate and coordinate support. In this context, we learned that working at the sector level provides a more manageable programme of targeted resilience work and makes sense, from the perspective of resilience partnerships, the sector and businesses within the sector. In particular, it puts the focus on how essential sectors can self-help to enhance resilience through improved relationships, collaborations, and mutual aid, before looking externally to how resilience gaps perhaps might be addressed through support from other sectors or the resilience partnership. And so the module provides 3 categories as examples of the types of sectors that fall under this definition. So we think that it's about sectors that provide care. So obviously care homes, but also care support at home for assisted living. Extra care schemes, urgent treatment support services. Also sectors that provide accommodation, which you'll have gathered from the theme of today's session, including social housing providers, people that provide temporary and emergency shelter, and homelessness support services as well. And last but by no means least, sectors that provide specialist support services to either care or indeed accommodation sectors, or generally to people who are vulnerable in a disruption. So mental health, GP practices, nursing, pharmacy, translation, transport, equipment, and food banks. So after all of the feedback and learning, we found it was useful to drill down to these 3 examples to address and drive home really the thinking in the module's design and the principles that underpin that thinking. In the simplest terms, the module says that a sector is not essential for resilience partnerships in a disruption simply because it provides an important service. So, for example, in this module, supermarkets are not essential because although they provide an important service, they have capacity to surge and there are adequate alternatives available to help that surge. I think Melissa and Chloe have already captured the assets that these sectors have really, really well, and the role that they play in the support system for people who are vulnerable in a disruption, especially when those people are their customers. An intimate knowledge, for example, of residents or customers, a really deep insight on needs and vulnerabilities in communities. They're clearly connected and are often the first port of call for customers when a disruption happens, which is a clear asset, but also a kind of an interesting one, coming back to one of the challenges that Chloe and Melissa highlighted around expectations on a daily basis, and not just in a disruption. These sectors problem solve with customers. Some have different relationships with others, but many have a desire to work more closely with customers to solve problems, and also an energy and an enthusiasm to address challenges in a disruption and to work collaboratively, recognizing that some challenges are difficult to address at the individual business level or even at the sector level. If we think about wide area, prolonged or concurrent disruptions, and the need to escalate those challenges and work more closely both across and outside of the sector. And so in a disruption, these assets create the ability to identify, to understand, and to appropriately support essential needs. And so the continuity of these sectors is essential to ensure appropriate planning and self-help in a disruption. And resilience partnerships need to assure those plans to have a realistic perspective on where the essential sector can and does self-help and where it could benefit from additional support to enhance resilience. So the module is structured in 4 parts. Part 1 focuses on why resilience partnerships should prioritise building the resilience of essential sectors. Part 2 is a guide on how to work with an essential sector to enhance resilience, and it provides a process for that collaboration. Part 3 provides a worksheet to structure focused resilience work with an essential sector. And part 4 provides 2 case studies of applying that worksheet to the 2 essential sectors of domiciliary care and social housing. So much of part 1 we've covered at length already, so I won't repeat, but the briefing provides the rationale for why resilience partnerships should prioritise building the resilience of essential sectors and defines key terms to understanding the process. Part 2 is the guide on how to work with an essential sector, which presents 8 steps to structure a series of one-to-one conversations or a series of targeted workshops or both to understand, assess and enhance the resilience of an essential sector. So in the guide, the process of each step is outlined in terms of the why, the justification and how. So steps 1 to 4 are focused on gaining an understanding of the sector. So this includes identifying the basics of the sector, such as key contacts in the sector, the services provided and how the sector supports people who are vulnerable, types of vulnerability, and how vulnerability is exacerbated by a disruption. It then seeks to understand the needs that those sectors address, the consequences if services in the sector are affected in a disruption, and the importance of the sector's resilience to the resilience partnership. Understanding then also helps to gauge the maturity of the sector's business continuity planning, the exercising of those as a sector, and collaboration with the resilience partnership in exercises. Steps 5 and 6 focus on addressing gaps in resilience, which involves the resilience partnership working with the sector to explore gaps in the sector's resilience and also in how the sector works with resilience partnerships. So, for example, gaps in understanding, relationships or processes. It then considers how gaps can be closed by the sector through self-help and also how gaps can be addressed through support from other sectors and also the resilience partnership. And step 7 begins conversations with the sector on how its assets and capabilities can contribute to societal resilience of the area where its residents or customers are based, for example. And finally then, step 8 explores how the actions to enhance resilience have been effective in making resilience gains and closing resilience gaps. So each of the steps in the guide has a series of questions to be considered to progress each of the steps. And these questions are then presented in part 3 as a worksheet to structure and also record the outcomes of a series of targeted workshops. So the worksheet applies the 8 steps and the questions help to calibrate the resilience and also the surge capacity of an essential sector in a disruption. So just to illustrate, step 2 focuses on understanding the societal needs that the sector meets and asks questions around who the sector supports, if those people have pre-existing vulnerabilities, and what needs that might create in a disruption. Step 3 identifies the potential consequences for people who are vulnerable in a disruption and also consequences for resilience partnerships if a disruption prevents or interferes with a sector's ability to meet, the type and scale of demand that might have been created by a disruption. So finally then, part 4 of the module provides 2 case studies of using the worksheet and presents complete worksheets for the 2 essential sectors of domiciliary care and social housing. And these case studies draw on insights that were gathered through the workshop conducted with providers and commissioners of domiciliary care and social housing and resilience partners. And they highlight resilience strengths, so capacities and assets of these sectors, gaps in resilience, for example, around business continuity and exercising, challenges around alternative provision in a disruption, and identifies actions which were identified by workshop participants to address those gaps, and offers as well from these sectors in terms of their offer and how they contribute to societal resilience. So the aim of part 4 is to provide a benchmark on how to apply the 8 steps in part 2 and the worksheet in part 3. And so by way of, I suppose, summary, prioritising the resilience of an essential sector aims to ensure that the people who depend on their services and who are vulnerable in a disruption continue to be cared for no matter what the situation. And through this module, the Resilience Partnership can balance the needs of vulnerable persons and the ability of an essential sector to offer services, that will meet those needs in a disruption. So the module itself will be available to download in early February from the link here, and the other 2 modules I mentioned at the beginning are currently available there, but this one specifically will be available in early February. But thank you very, very much for listening. I think, Andrew, we can maybe move to take some questions, but thank you again.
Well, thank you very much, Roisin, and thank you for taking everyone through the upcoming anticipated NCSR Module 3, and obviously then also setting that in the context of the previous modules. As you were speaking and after I placed into the chat the link to the NCSR webpage where the first 2 modules can be downloaded, I have noted on our email address a number of downloads have been happening. So yeah, getting the information out is extremely valuable. So thank you for that and giving us a prompt. As I mentioned at the beginning in the introduction, we usually have a generous time for a question and answer session. And just like previous webinars, I think today then we also do have at least a good 30 minutes to run through various questions that you may have. As I mentioned earlier, we do like to ensure that people can verbalize their own question. I have noted from the chat that I think if I could maybe ask Martin Halse and Melvin Hartley, first of all, if you could just raise your hands, because then I can enable your cameras and your microphones. But I noticed that you have some really excellent questions in there, and as Melissa and Chloe presented first of all, then I think we will firstly move towards Martin and then Melvin. So if I could ask those that are asking their questions, if you can firstly introduce yourself and then ask your question. So I know that the first 2 are for Melissa and Chloe. So hopefully, Martin, if you can now take over and unmute yourself and come on screen, then you'll be able to ask. And then after Martin, then Melvin, I see you've already taken control. So Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, a really good presentation. I manage risk, emergency and business resilience at Leicester City Council Unitary Authority. We have had numerous instances where housing association properties have been affected, and it's been quite patchy in being able to get hold of the housing association out of hours at certain times. And really, I mean, it's excellent what you're doing, I think. And I think the sort of council background of, I think it was Melissa, perhaps shows out a bit as well. But we are trying to contact the different housing associations that have properties in Leicester of any size, and it's quite a long list actually. And I'm conscious a lot of their headquarters are elsewhere in the country. You know, we have got some locally, but actually getting hold of them and getting buy-in is a real challenge. And I suspect any LRF is going to sort of struggle really. And I just wonder if there's any advice, because clearly even yourselves, it would be a challenge to engage with lots of different LRFs. And is there a better way of doing it, like where the headquarters is based and then that LRF takes that role and feeds out to others? But I was just interested because we're finding it quite a challenge to secure attendance at our event.
Melissa, I think with your background in both local authority and Abri, I'll hand that one to you if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. I'll start and comment, and of course, Chloe, I'll invite you to comment if there's anything to add from your perspective. Martin, thank you so much for your question and for joining and your comment on our presentation today. It's a really interesting one, but what I would say is, do you know what? You've taken the first step in actually thinking about housing associations based in your area and booking a meeting with them, because that's what we reflected on in our conversation and our presentation, was to simply talk to these colleagues, because actually, as we mentioned, they may have these skills, this geographical, these vulnerability knowledge that would provide really useful. Of course, you're never going to be able to guarantee that these partners, these colleagues will turn up and want to be engaged with you. But what we found from the flip side of things, actually from our perspective, and I think it's something we touched upon as well, is we've actually invited those partners, so local authority, colleagues, emergency service partners as well, to our exercises and to other events, that they can actually see the challenges we face firsthand. They can see how we deal with disruptions firsthand. So for you, that might be something interesting you might want to consider moving forward, because they might not know that you're wanting to reach out to them and be part of this conversation and work together. So absolutely, to summarise, you've definitely taken the first step, which is fantastic, and that's, as a housing association, that's what we would want you to do. But yeah, inviting them to the party for an exercise or another event that you're hosting, and ones we've been part of personally as well, is another step to that, and one I would definitely advise to do for sure. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Chloe.
Yeah, just echo everything you've said there, Melissa. I think events, exercises, anything that's maybe outside of the box than a traditional meeting is always great. I always tend to try and focus on things. It's very difficult. I appreciate that at a local level. So appreciate you mentioned there, Martin, that you have a numerous amount of housing associations. It might be worth in some cases kind of taking that down a level and looking at it more on a localized approach, in terms of even building those connections with your housing association at a kind of much lower level. So something that's worked for us is our kind of more regional approach. So we kind of are building those connections, building those relationships at a localized level, that can then link into our wider response at kind of a strategic, tactical and operational level if needed. But yeah, it is very difficult. I think part of the presentation, me and Melissa covered that we're part of the Business Continuity Social Housing Forum. So I think, Melissa, maybe one for us to take back to our forum is to say, you know, have you got any ideas in terms of what we can do to kind of make building these connections a little bit easier, and take back and ask to our Business Continuity Social Housing Forum to say, you know, open the door to your local resilience forums as well, you know, make sure it's on both sides. But yeah, thank you for your question though. It's really useful insight.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.
I think, Martin, and just before we move on, obviously Chloe and Melissa, in terms of our initial contact, several months ago, obviously that was in the context of a kind of a national network in relation to housing associations, and then Roisin's workshop that was mentioned on Merseyside. So could you maybe, in terms of that sort of broader national network that people might perhaps be able to tap into, is there any kind of insights that either of you both, or including Roisin as well, could maybe let people know about?
I think sorry, Chloe. But that was something I was just going to pick up on in terms of the Business Continuity Forum. That very much came through the work with housing associations in Merseyside. And I suppose a slightly different perspective. I think there were people who were there who were aware of the forum, and also people who weren't. So nearly the exercise of bringing a range of people together. And I think there's an interesting point around coverage, because a lot of housing associations will have sites across multiple local authority areas. So the Business Continuity Forum, I think, is an excellent, I suppose, mechanism for bringing people together. But also then having the workshop at the Merseyside local level, it was great for also housing associations to become more aware of networks that exist, and created opportunity for people to join those networks. So that was all I was going to add to that. But kind of almost there was a two kind of pronged benefit to that, I think.
Sorry, Chloe, go ahead.
No, that's absolutely fine. I was just it's very similar, Roisin. I think it's almost that two level approach, isn't it? And making sure that, we have that awareness at that kind of framework level, but also at the level of, on the ground, building those really local connections, going to the events, actually being on site in the communities, seeing how this translates from kind of conversation to reality. I think that's really important. So, very similar, but no, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And just before bringing Melvin in, if I could just encourage people to raise your hands if you have some follow-on questions, including in relation to Roisin's presentation. By raising your hands, it just enables me to see where you are, and so that I can allow your camera and your microphone. But Melvin, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Andrew. Melissa and Chloe, we all know each other pretty well, as a disclosure, because obviously Abri's headquarters are in my borough, and Melissa used to work for the neighbouring authority. That really helped break down the barriers. There's a couple of things. One, just to answer that question which was just raised, was to say that I found a good way in, and this is kind of like in reverse way, is that I've had a couple of instances in premises owned by other housing associations, and we've had to deal with incidents, and that has now given me a way into that housing association, and that's really helped. But Abri did it the right way and invited us to take part in their exercise and in their way. But my question was, I suppose it follows on, Chloe, Melissa, how do you've got a huge area. How do you prevent yourself being spread too thinly? How do you manage that demand? Because I know you're a very small team. What have you done with your other colleagues to make sure that they can respond just as well? Because the two of you can't be everywhere, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely, Melvin. And thank you for your question, and thank you for sharing our kind of understanding of each other and how that works. But I think, from our perspective, me and Melissa, we can't be everywhere at once. And also, it does eliminate the point of a business continuity team if the business relies on the business continuity team being there. So part of what a lot of we do is we're doing a lot of exercising and training with our colleagues to ensure that they are, as prepared to deliver the plans and processes as we are. And I touched on this in my response to Martin's question, but Abri, we adopt a regional approach. So although we are spread right across the south of England, we are split into regions, and that provides us to kind of maintain that large but local approach to everything. So we ensure that really any response that we take has that community response at the very heart, on the ground, but that absolutely it links up to the wider organizational response to allow for that support, those kind of that coordination and so on. But really, a lot of, I suppose, me and Melissa's role day to day is really supporting, empowering, and ensuring that our colleagues are trained and, you know, able to respond to these emergencies as part of their day to day. That's really what we want to aim towards. You know, plans, procedures, playbooks, they're all well and good. However, we find that the real difference comes with having really great training and embedding processes in place. Melissa, did you want to join in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just echo everything you said there, Chloe, and thank you, Melvin, for your question. What I would say as well is, whilst we as an organisation, we do all this great work, we are an ever-growing organisation. So, you know, nobody gets everything right first time, every single time. Our partnership working is a really ever-evolving journey. And we know that, and absolutely that's why, as Chloe quite rightly mentioned, we do empower those colleagues to respond to these emergencies, and they do so absolutely as part of their business as usual work anyway. And back to the exercising piece. Now we are really frequently getting involved in exercising and testing our plans, our procedures. Colleagues expect them and they almost look forward to them. And that enables them to, you know, in an incident, pick up a business continuity plan that has been written in collaboration with them, and use it without necessarily even needing a support or insight from us as well. So that's been really interesting and great to see. But yeah, like I said, it's an ever-evolving journey and one we're working really hard on.
Thank you both, and I will say this, as I don't want to embarrass you, but the flood we recently had at Alexander Square, just down the road from my offices, your training obviously worked, because who I can't remember the name of the lady from your team from Abri who took control. I mean, you managed to house 40 something residents within 2 hours of the flood occurring, and that's superb business continuity on behalf of yourself as an organisation, and training of your senior staff who are able to do that. So well done. If only the others were just as good, that's what I'd say.
Thank you, Melvin.
Thanks, Melvin.
Well, thank you very much, Melvin. So I would encourage people to raise their hands to ask any questions. I see Odama, your hand is raised. So if you're able to maybe come on camera and off mute, and please let us know who you are, where you're from, and then pose your question. Hi, Odama, so I can see you now. So if you just unmute, then everything should be.
You're just on mute, Odama.
Maybe Odamo, just in the interest of continuity, maybe if you, in the interim, I see that Sasha has also raised a hand. So Sasha, I'll enable your camera and mic, and then we can come back to Odama once the technical challenges have been overcome. Sasha, have I successfully done that? Your hand
hello,
okay.
Andrew.
Hi.
You've disabled the mic, but not the camera. So,
okay.
But not to worry. I'm sure you can
okay.
live without seeing seeing my face. I got a question, and yeah, I suppose it's for Melissa and Chloe, but probably putting it out there to any other LRF colleagues that are on this call. I just wondered whether you had much of a relationship with the LRFs in terms of community resilience. And what I mean by that is that in Kent and Medway Resilience Forum that I'm representing here, we have a established community resilience group with a membership of various organisations. I wonder whether perhaps not your individual housing association, but whether you're aware of if there is any housing association representation on groups like that within LRFs, and also just to open it up to anyone else on the call that might, have the housing group on their community resilience working group.
Yeah, I'll take that question first, if that's okay, to the other colleagues, and of course invite other colleagues to comment. And Sasha, thank you for your question. That's a really interesting topic, and something. Community resilience is something Abri are really passionate about, because for us it's not necessarily just about having plans and procedures in place for our communities. It's what we can do to help communities in other ways. So, for example, during the pandemic, providing food and places to go and people to talk to, and other sort of community resilience from that perspective as well. Speaking more locally and from a Hampshire and Isle of Wight LRF perspective, a little while ago now, but we certainly were involved in a community resilience event with the LRF as Abri, and we attended with other partners from emergency services, the Environment Agency, Southern Electric, the electricity utility provider. Well, we spoke exactly similar to what we were speaking about now, actually, about resilience and what that means within Abri and what that means within the community that we support. So it's something that certainly we've been part of, and we're hoping to do again, certainly as our organisation gets wider and grows, we're hoping to do that more in our other geography. But yeah, I'm sure that might be shared by other colleagues on the call. I don't know, Chloe, if you've got anything to add or invite any other colleagues to do so.
Yeah, no, nothing to add from me. But yeah, absolutely. I think we try to take a view of it outside of just plans and playbooks, but linking it really closely to the community investment and engagement work that we do as part of our business as usual. So, like Melissa touched on there, anything to do with like employment. We set up a buddy system during the pandemic, so customers could call colleagues, for example, just to maintain kind of that social element. So things like that we try to build into those into that kind of wider piece of community resilience. But yeah, it's something that I would say we want to do more in. I would say is that would you agree with that, Melissa? I think it's an area that we recognise we have such an element that we can provide support to. So yeah, I'd be really interested to hear from other colleagues on the call to see how we could do that, how do more of that, or vice versa.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was just thinking along the lines of, sort of you obviously, have close contact and knowledge of your customers and their vulnerabilities. And I'm just wondering, sort of like the role that you can have in getting preparedness messages to them in a way, in a language and format that they're familiar with, rather than, it coming from an LRF. And, to be able to bring housing associations and such like on board on sort of groups like community resilience groups for LRFs, I think could be really valuable. But I'm sure that there must be some LRFs that are already doing it. So it'd be good to hear from them.
Thank you very much, Sasha. And of course, Chloe, Melissa, you obviously mentioned in your presentation in relation to the Civil Contingencies Act and certain challenges then from the housing providers' perspective around that, and that possibly then speaks to those kind of interactions and intersections and how that's done, formally, informally, perhaps more so. Is there anything that you'd perhaps like to elaborate on that perhaps wasn't mentioned within the presentation, that then perhaps other colleagues from LRF settings might then want to comment on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we did touch on it in our presentation, Andrew, the sense that I think where it becomes difficult is that, from a perspective of a housing association, it's easy to say, well, we're not recognised as a responder, so we don't have a role. And I think that's the grey area that typically we find ourselves in that sense that it's hard to navigate how far we should go, and like I mentioned, with the expectations and limitations that brings. I think again I think the only advice I would give from that is to reach out, speak to your local housing association, and understand what their view of their role is, because that is where, unless we have clear recognition, and it's much more clear cut in that sense, it does pose a problem. But from the experience that we've had in the Business Continuity Social Housing Forum, I think I speak for the majority of the members on there, that is that if we have a role to play in terms of whatever is best for our customers to respond to that and support the agencies that are recognised responders, absolutely that is something we would want to do and be part of. So yeah, absolutely. If there was to kind of Sasha's point, I think it's an area that we're really passionate at Abri, that we are kind of either included in the conversations with LRFs or in a group or whatever that may be, or even if it is just as basic as having a conversation and knowing who you can go to and keeping it on that kind of more informal level. I think that's kind of vital, really. Melissa, did you want to add anything else to that?
Not really. I would just again echo everything you said there, Chloe, and the point Sasha raised around community resilience. As you've said, community resilience is an area we know there's a lot of work we could do and so much we could tap into, so much influence we could have, because we know these customers, we know these residents across our geography so well and have built up such great relationships with them. Our colleagues have indeed. So events like this are really interesting and important for us to gain the network, gain those connections where we can simply reach out, have a chat, even in a really informal setting, and just find out how we can help each other to help these members of the public that need us. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
If you don't mind, Andrew, if I could just
yes, go
add
ahead.
to that.
Thank you.
Similarly, in terms of all of the social housing providers, but also domiciliary care providers that we spoke to through the project, echo everything that Melissa and Chloe have said. In addition, one thing was raised, and it kind of rings true with what Melissa was just saying around awareness, and actually so much in bringing people into the same room, having that conversation, exploring what each other does, really kind of, opens up opportunities that don't actually then translate to a huge amount of extra work or effort or anything like that. And we heard kind of a lot of examples of where there was, I suppose, maybe a lack of clarity or just an unawareness actually of some of the assets, some of the capabilities that were realised, I suppose, after the fact. So after something happened, that actually it was a case where, oh, well, maybe a housing association said, well, we could have actually helped with that. But we didn't really have that conversation going before the fact, essentially, and how much value really can come from bringing people together through, for example, a one-day workshop and just digging into some of those details and what's in there.
Well, thank you very much, Roisin, also for adding, and obviously others within on the call, perhaps from the LRF perspective, feel free to raise your hands to come in to join this conversation. But I think, Adama, if I'm correct, it seems like your audio issue may be fixed. So if you're able to, then please let us know who you are and then your question, please.
All right, thank you, Andrew. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you, and good afternoon. Good afternoon to you all. My name is Odama Francis. I am from Nigeria, and I represent the Peace Corps of Nigeria, a youth-based organization that is into, it's an NGO in Nigeria. I want to say kudos to the presenters, great presentations. And now, when it comes to preparedness,
Hi, Adama, is everything? Yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to preparedness, one of the objectives, or rather the major objective, is to ensure that vulnerable persons continue to be cared for. And now my question is, how does disparity in access to resources affect this objective of vulnerable people continue to be cared for when there's disparity in resources to reaching out to these vulnerable persons? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Adama, and thank you for joining us from Nigeria. And I will perhaps put this firstly to Roisin. obviously in relation to your work around essentiality and essential sectors and those kind of intersections. So if you'd maybe like to address the question, and then I can come to Melissa and Chloe for any kind of follow-ups.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think probably when you say access, Adam, I kind of think of probably two things. One from the perspective of people who are vulnerable in a disruption and their access to the things they need to help themselves when a disruption happens and their ability to do that. And then also of the partners, whether they be businesses, voluntary sector, local resilience forums, in terms of their resources then to both reach, understand and provide support needed for vulnerable people in disruption. I think it's a continuous piece of work, really. I think from the perspective of the module and the work that we did, first recognizing pretty much at that individual level that there are people who will need additional help, and really that the focus on essential sectors is essentially kind of, and to echo kind of everything Melissa and Chloe have said around their insights on needs, their insights on vulnerability, that actually almost relationships can help that access. For example, partnerships are almost a resource in that regard, through, for example, resilience partnerships, engaging with local housing associations in their area, or other sectors like domiciliary care and specialist transport, for example, and that those kind of, that I suppose, in essence, really that relationships provide as a really valuable resource in that regard, that can help to both reach and understand better people who need help, but also understanding what need they actually help, and maybe not predetermining that. And for example, as Melissa and Chloe have said, that residents, for example, will go to their landlords first. So actually housing associations will have almost an immediate understanding, perhaps, and quite a live understanding of what needs are in that local area. And so that can be really, really helpful in terms of, intelligence, for example, on needs in a disruption for resilience partnerships. I hope that's kind of in part. I think access is such a huge, access to resources is such a huge area, but I think probably one of the biggest learnings that we had from our work was actually the resource that's offered by relationships and partnerships, and really how far it can take you. Thank you. Melissa, Chloe, I don't know if you wanted to come in on that one.
Yeah, Chloe and Melissa, if there's anything that you might like to add.
Nothing from me, just agree with everything that Roisin said there. I think that the key to it is data, knowing your customers, knowing your people, and being able to use that in an incident is like a real valuable tool. So
Thank you very much. And obviously, Adama, I guess, Russian, and I suppose you may confirm, but we anticipate that the Module 3 will be ready early to mid-February for download. So obviously, people will be able to access that resource and then, be able to read for yourself in terms of, the terms and the understanding of essential sectors and needs in the context of disruption. So that will be ready in the next number of weeks.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Well, thank
that
you
was
very
quite
much.
Insightful. I look forward to getting them downloaded and study some more. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I've often been muting my mic because my email notifications come through every time a download happens. So I've muted myself a lot because through the context of the webinar, there's been quite a number of downloads. So just moving on, I see Martin, your hand raised again. So I'm making an assumption that that's perhaps related to the conversation we've just been having. But please, if you'd like to come on camera and off mute, you'll have a chance to ask another question.
Yeah, sorry to monopolise it. It's just a different kind of subject in a way, but I was wondering whether there was any awareness within housing associations about the Grenfell Inquiry report, which highlighted the lack of working between the housing association and the local authority as quite a big issue. It's certainly one we picked up from it, getting the recommendations and putting from a Leicester City Council perspective. I wondered if there was awareness within housing associations. So maybe a difficult one to answer, I appreciate, but it was relevant to councils, but also housing associations, and it's obviously a high-profile report, should we say?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for your question, Martin. Yeah, it's absolutely something that I can only speak for Abri, but that we're definitely taking very seriously. And we have created our own kind of working group, steering group to look at that, what the impact brings to not only the services we provide, but the impact in terms of, what additional community engagement we need to take, what lessons we can learn from that, not just from a building safety perspective, but actually just in terms of improving and building on what we already provide to our customers. So yeah, it's absolutely something that we're managing and kind of coordinating it as its own piece, really. And yeah, definitely something that I know is only going to kind of become greater from here. I think the report's always typically just the first step. It's kind of the ongoing from that, the implementation of that, and how that will naturally go on. So yes, it is something that Abri are taking seriously and implementing, and also reaching out to our customers to find out a little bit more about them. And again, like I touched on in the presentation, our community action days, that was very similarly linked to the Grenfell report, in terms of us going out to our high-rise blocks and asking customers, do you feel safe in your home? That type of event is linked to all of that work that we're doing to understand, okay, this is what the report recommends, but what more can we do? What more do our customers want to see from us, and what more can we provide in this space? Melissa, is there anything you wanted to add on to that point?
Nothing to add on to that one. No, thank you. I would just again agree with everything you said, and very much echo that something of that scale, like you've mentioned, Chloe, is very much the first step, and absolutely links into everything we do from a resilience perspective. But yeah, thank you for your question, Martin.
So Sasha, if you'd like to come in again, please.
Hi, yeah, mine's more of a technical thing. Andrew, I don't seem to be able to access the chat. So what you're talking about, the download, I think you've probably put in as a link, but I don't see, I haven't seen that. Would you be sending it out separately anyway, with the slides from today?
Well, we will certainly be communicating in relation to the webinar recording, and I can send directly to you, Sasha, in relation to the link, but it is just on the NCSR webpage.
Okay, I'll find it there. Thank you.
and when module 3 is ready and on the webpage, then it will be in the same location as the first 2 modules. So that will then be communicated through the various NCSR email listservs. So hopefully that helps. But it is on the webpage in terms of modules 1 and 2, and module 3 will be there at some point in February.
Thank you. I thought I was missing out. I thought it was already on there. I'm just being impatient for it. Thank you.
We seem to have some technical challenges when with the webinars in terms of chat and other functions. I'm not quite sure. I don't know why some people can use the chat but others can't. Some of it might be localized to different machines or locations. I'm not sure is the short answer, but we obviously, because the webinars are recorded, then no one will miss anything, because those will obviously get shared and they will be placed onto YouTube, and the links available through the various communications. I have to an extent neglected the chat, but there is a kind of a slightly separate chat going on in relation to Richard, and I consciously haven't come to your comment, Richard, just because I'm not sure if any of our speakers will have engaged much with the English devolution white paper as yet on what that might mean for their context. But I'm especially as you asked it, obviously with specific reference to LRFs and the footprints. But I'm glad that I've seen a number of the colleagues who are on the call from different LRFs, so obviously then been responding to the questions that you've raised. So hopefully that's given some insights. I will obviously leave it open to Chloe, Melissa, and Roisin at this point if there's anything around the English devolution white paper and how that might impact. If there's anything that you might want to say, please let me know. But that was a kind of an assumption that I've been making.
I think it's a fair assumption, Andrew. I suppose less so about the white paper itself. I suppose more about a couple of the things that Richard mentioned, kind of with it, including people changing roles, how that might affect kind of ongoing work, etc. I think something that we found through speaking, and it was housing associations again who were talking about, when people move around, often they take their contacts with them, for example, which can sometimes be a challenge. But I think kind of taking a bit of a helicopter view in terms of what the module is trying to achieve, having key contacts in the sector is excellent. I think it's dependent on where you're putting the emphasis on the work that you want to do. Like I said earlier, the benefit that you can get from having a full day workshop, bringing everyone into the room for a day, almost starts to do its own work afterwards. For example, a big emphasis is put on what the sector can do itself. So I'm not sure. I don't necessarily think it addresses it, but I think there is definite value in having a full day workshop and letting the work kind of take its own flight almost following that, and letting everybody go away and within their sector do what they want to and need to do. I don't necessarily think it addresses that, but just to pick up on, I suppose, sustaining work with essential sectors, I think changing roles can be a challenge, but I don't think it's a block.
Well, thank you very much, Roisin, and to everyone in the chat who has responded to Richard. I dare say, in terms of some of the academic work we get up to at Manchester, obviously some of us may be touching upon kind of the implications and obviously in terms of our past research and writing, there has also been various references to different boundaries and how the various resilience partnerships functions and some of the challenges around it. So I dare say we'll be touching upon the devolution white paper and how it gets rolled out. We're coming to a close, and we've had some fantastic contributions from the audience in terms of your questions on the chats, but especially also from our three speakers today. Just to do a shout out for a kind of a new initiative which are really in the foothills in terms of the NCSR, but we are kind of starting a kind of a new practitioner oriented network with a kind of an international bent. So it's really a kind of looking at creating a platform where we can potentially share practical lessons and challenges on societal resilience, focusing on what works, what doesn't, and why, and trying to obviously interact with colleagues internationally in relation to learning and deriving those kind of lessons and having that kind of two-way conversations. So we will be having a meeting online on the 10th of February. So for any of our international attendees at today's event, if you're interested in attending that and you're able to see in the chat, and I'm about to press the button on the email address for that, if you're interested in attending a meeting on the 10th of February online, then or if you can't attend but you're obviously interested in finding out more, then please email us at that address or email us at the NCSR account that we have used in relation to circulating information on this webinar. And obviously we would love to see you on the 10th. So Adama, perhaps if you're not already aware of that, then obviously that's something that you might be interested in from the Nigerian perspective. So I think that's us drawing to a close. So I'd like to thank Melissa, Oh, go ahead, Roisin.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I was just going to very quickly, just before we close, pick up on a comment in the chat from MK, and it's really just to flag a particular part of the module that might be of interest because of this question around metrics to measure local resilience efforts. And although the module doesn't necessarily provide specific metrics that you would measure by, step 8 essentially reviews actions that have been identified to assess whether resilience gaps have been closed. So that may be of interest in terms of that kind of area of measuring, I suppose, progress in addressing where gaps are and in communities, and also where essential sectors are, for example. So I just wanted to flag that might be of interest in response to that question, MK, in the chat. Thanks, Andrew.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks, Roisin. And I guess it was probably 2 webinars back. We obviously had a really
Yes.
interesting webinar focus on measuring resilience. So that recording, I've just placed the slides up again, so you can obviously see our web page where you can go to watch previous webinar recordings. So measuring resilience, I think that was perhaps October 2024, and you can obviously watch in that webinar just to see how that, the particular perspectives of the speakers at that event last year. So yeah, thank you once again. Thank you to Melissa, Chloe, Roisin for generously giving of your time, not only obviously today and answering questions, but obviously the preparation time that goes into bringing together presentations. And I'd like to thank all of you for attending this session. As yet, we don't have a date for the next webinar, but of course we do have the major conference coming up on the 10th and 11th of March in person over 2 days. So please sign up for that if you're able to and haven't already, and we would look forward to seeing you then. We will obviously communicate when we have the upcoming webinar dates sorted for 2025, and you will find out about that probably just after the conference. So thank you very much, and yes, we will see you next time. So thank you.